Well, one of the things we like to focus on here at the Aussie Wire is accountability, just getting to the truth, understanding what's really happened and the fallout from what's really happened. And of course, one of the topics that we need to be continuing to look at is the fallout from the COVID era, the vaccines, the mandates, the civil rights abuses, but also how our money was spent. Putting aside all the civil rights abuses, we have the right to expect that money is well spent and in an effective way, given that it comes from us as taxpayers. And on that front, I've got to say there's some really interesting things happening that have the potential to lead to some very good outcomes. Here to help me wrap my head around it, because there is a lot going on, and she's across it better than I am, is none other than our WA correspondent, Rebekah Barnett. Rebekah, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire once again.
Hey, Topher.
Now,
We've got a few lawsuits to talk about.
we have so many lawsuits to talk about. Now, I've been enjoying your Substack, and by the way, your Twitter and your Instagram are also going off. My wife this morning, when she found out that I was chatting with you today, she was like, "Oh, tell her that her social media is going off." So everyone, if you're not following Rebekah Barnett, she's got a Substack which is amazing to read, and some great social media channels where you can follow her and be kept up to date with this sort of stuff. But look, let's dive in. There's some really interesting things happening now. We're seeing. Let's start with this one. Pfizer is taking Poland to court. What's this about?
Right. So back in the beginning of the whole vaccine rollout, Ursula von der Leyen from the EU Parliament negotiated that the EU countries collectively would purchase over 1 billion COVID vaccine doses from Pfizer. Now, obviously, it turned out to be not as effective as everyone thought it was going to be, and the desire to get vaccinated has not been as high in the population as was anticipated. So there's a lot of doses just left expiring and getting
Mm,
binned. So
mm,
the Polish government tried to renegotiate the contract that was, to my understanding, essentially negotiated on their behalf. They were committed to purchase all these vaccines. There's 60 million doses that they don't want that never could be used. And so they tried to renegotiate, and Pfizer just wouldn't let them. They were just
mm,
like, no, pay up. So now Poland doesn't want to pay up. So Pfizer's suing them for payment of 60 million unused doses. And for context, Poland has less than a 40 million population last time I checked.
mm.
So yeah, and we know that not everyone in the population is approved for vaccination. So, you know, comparative to the population, that's a lot of vaccine doses that they don't need or want. And Pfizer's really shown no flexibility on accommodating that.
Well, I have no love for Pfizer at all, but looking at the government side of this, they're making very big decisions, spending enormous amounts of money based on very little information right in the middle of a panic. And now they're trying to extract themselves from that. And as much as I sympathise with the taxpayers of Poland and of the EU, there needs to be accountability not just on the Pfizer side of things, but also on their side of things for signing these documents in the first place, doesn't there?
Well, I think there was a furor over Ursula von der Leyen's role in that. So there was, if you remember, a little while ago, questions over whether there'd been some backdoor kind of communications between herself and Albert Bourla,
Mm,
who's the head of Pfizer. So they had some text messages going back and forth, and there were questions raised about whether she was kind of whether she had the EU's best interests at heart or herself and
yeah.
her mates. So they it's a bit of both. It looks like the EU kind of put some of these governments in a position, but also the prime ministers or presidents of prime ministers, I think, in Europe.
Mm.
Um, Not a political scientist, don't quote me. They also have a role. And we know that in Romania, there's some pretty salty people who are investigating their own prime minister for having committed, to enormous quantities of the jabs that weren't used. So what have we got?
Mm.
A billion on Pfizer jabs
And now
that were
this
never.
is this is Romanian prosecutors, so this has the prospect, and we don't know yet, but we'll keep an eye on it, of actually becoming a criminal issue. If Romanian government prosecutors are looking at it, it's because there is the belief that there may be some sort of criminality here. I'm not, of course, preempting what their conclusions may be, but this seems to be playing out quite a lot. I mean, there's $1 billion on Pfizer COVID jabs that were never used here. Another story that you brought to my attention: Germany is binning them. Is
Yeah.
this a worldwide problem? Is this unique to the European
Yeah, and we
Union?
know that in For sure. We know that in Australia, our government bought enough for 10 doses for every Australian, just of the primary series. So
Wow.
a huge number of those were binned. I don't recall the exact figures, but it was something like a third or, extraordinary number of doses were binned. And that was just of the primary series. So yeah, it's definitely been a problem worldwide. You can see why people start to ask serious questions about corruption. It just doesn't look right on the face of it. Why
Well,
would any government think that we need 10 doses per person of a product that expires before we're even at the fourth dose?
and a product that expires and that was acknowledged from the start there would be mutations that would require changes to the makeup of the vaccines in any case. So buying 10 per person of that first, I mean, I can't make head nor tail of it, honestly. Now, there is some better news happening elsewhere in the world, though, in terms of lawsuits going the other way. We've talked about Pfizer trying to sue countries to get money out of their taxpayers, but actually, over in Texas, the good old Texas Attorney General Paxton has taken Pfizer to court again. He's doing it over other issues not related to the COVID-19 vaccines. Tell us about this lawsuit, though.
Yeah, so the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, on behalf of the state of Texas, is suing Pfizer for essentially misleading and deceiving the public about the effectiveness of its vaccine. So he's saying they exaggerated it and deceived the public. So there's a few grounds for that. One is the duration of protection, and it is alleged. I do believe that regulatory filings show that Pfizer withheld information that it had about how long the duration of protection was and allowed the public messaging to give the impression that it would protect you essentially indefinitely or for a much longer time than it does. When they had information that was contrary to that, but they allowed the messaging to carry on. There was the misleading over transmission, where again, Pfizer's clever. They didn't outright say, oh, it will stop all transmission, but they allowed people to think that they would be protecting their family and they would be protecting their community by getting vaccinated when there was no data to support that. And then variant protection. There's as the virus kept mutating, the allegation is that Pfizer allowed people to think that vaccine targeted to an old strain would protect them just as well against a new strain, when again, there just wasn't data to support that. And then after that, when people did say, well, actually, that's not right. Here's data to show that that's not right. We're questioning the truth of Pfizer's statements or insinuations. The allegation is that Pfizer engaged in suppression of those people's speech, particularly in colluding with social media, possibly government. And Alex Berenson is one high-profile person he's a American journalist. He's a high-profile case of that kind of suppression. He's actually suing Pfizer for suppressing his First Amendment rights in collusion with the White House. So this will presumably be one of many court cases to come forward alleging the same.
Well, it's all a bit of a mess, and I remember saying as we approached Christmas last year, I gave my Christmas message as I do, and there will, of course, be one coming up this year as well. But the point that I made last year was that, in my view, 2023 would be the year when the pushback began in earnest. Now, that's not to say that we would be winning in 2023, but that's when the pushback would begin in earnest. And it's taken a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but I'd say that the last 6 months, we've certainly seen things hotting up, lawsuits flying around the place, the suggestion or at least the opportunity for criminal charges to begin to be laid, and a lot of the people that went along with this early on becoming increasingly unhappy with the way that it's all played out. How do you see this playing out in the future?
Well, going off prior pharmaceutical fraud, criminality, and corruption cases, my feeling is that this will take a decade, maybe two.
Yeah.
The thalidomide survivors only just got a national apology last week, and this is
62
decades
years.
on.
62 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And honestly, if I can be cynical for a second, I don't think that the Australian Prime Minister did that out of the care of his heart. I think he did that because he needed something to try and get him a bounce in the polls. 62 years is a strange anniversary to finally issue an apology on, and I think it was done for political reasons, not out of any real sincerity, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment on that, but it's a long time to wait. And
Mm,
the DES scandal, which is similar to the thalidomide scandal, where a drug's given to mothers during pregnancy, that affects then their children and their
mm,
grandchildren.
mm,
Again, that took decades for an apology and for class actions to get going. You think about the OxyContin scandal. I mean, to my mind, that story's not finished. We've
mm,
had Dope Sick on Netflix, and then there's another one that's come out. I can't remember the name of it, but Purdue Pharma has had some degree of accountability. They've been held to accountability to a degree,
mm.
not enough in my opinion, and probably not in the opinion of the victims' families, but OxyContin's still for sale.
Yeah,
So, and there's still an opioid crisis in the US. So I don't even think that story's finished.
yeah,
It's been going for decades. So my feeling is that this is not something that's going to be just dealt with in the next year or two and we'll all get justice. And I just don't think that's really how it works with this industry. I think this industry is very powerful.
mm,
And they've got the best lawyers. They're very experienced in, okay, we'll take the slap on the wrist or we'll pay a few $1 billion that,
mm,
doesn't really put much of a dent in the bottom line as it is. And I've seen people say what we need is criminal prosecutions for the people at the top who are in charge of it,
mm,
and they need to go to jail. And that's my personal opinion
mm,
that, if all that is happening to the people who are responsible for this level of what appears to be corruption, fraud, criminality, if all they have to do is just pay a fine, well, that's
yeah, forget
that's a
about it.
business model.
Yeah,
Just keep doing what you're doing, pay a fine every so often, and make net profit.
mm,
So why would you stop? Why would you stop the bad behavior under that model? You
yeah,
wouldn't.
yeah.
So there need to be tougher consequences, I think, but I can't see that happening in the near future. What do
Yeah,
you think?
I tend to agree with that whole assessment. And buttressing your point is the fact that these are companies that have already, before COVID, before their vaccines for the coronavirus came out, they've already paid the largest criminal fines of any organisation in history. And that hasn't deterred them from engaging in what you rightly say appears to be some corrupt, and certainly the Attorney General of Texas would allege misleading and dishonest behaviour with regard to the effectiveness, at the very least, if not also safety and all sorts of other things. There's a lot that we're not saying here, of course. And so, if those largest ever criminal fines were not enough to deter them from then re-engaging in the exact sort of behaviour, allegedly, that they have been found guilty of in the past, then you have to wonder what would it take to change their behaviour. And I'm with you. I think we need to get to the point where there are individuals being criminally held to account for what's happened, but the road there is a long one. This is a 10, 15, 20-year journey. So any final
Yeah.
thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of class actions in the works in Australia. There's one that's already
Melissa McCann
taking
being
on
one.
members and it's filed, Dr. Mel McCann's, and
Mm-hmm.
there's another one in the works. And they are promising in the sense that if they succeed, and they hold the downstream players to account, so the officials who signed off on all of this, right
Mm-hmm.
down to the medical professionals, actually,
Mm-hmm.
in one of the cases is looking at that,
Mm.
then it may make those players reticent to participate
In the
in the
future.
future, and
Yeah.
that would make it potentially harder for the pharmaceutical
Mm.
companies to push them or to coerce
Mm.
them into or to incentivize them
Yeah.
into allowing the bad behavior
There's all,
from upstream.
there's also a reality that you need to build up a case if ultimately the objective is to see criminal liability and criminal responsibility for those individuals at the very top, which I agree needs to be the objective. In order to get there, you first have to prove in a court of law that something wrong was done. And you don't do that by accusing them criminally. You do that by a much more fundamental court case. And then once that's been won, you can then build another case on top of that and build another case on top of that. And over a period of years and multiple cases, we may get to the point where eventually those charges can be laid. But I think we're a fair way away even from that. Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Sorry?
No, I agree. I just think it's going to be a bit of a slog. And lawfare
Mm-hmm.
will take however long it takes.
Mm.
But I don't, I don't think they'll get away with it forever. But I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And I don't think that undermines the fact that the lawsuits need to continue being brought.
Absolutely. And anyone who isn't already following Rebekah Barnett's Substack, it's Dystopian Down Under, as well as all over social media, I highly recommend follow her work. And we will, of course, here at the Aussie Wire, stay across this story and many others as well. Rebekah Barnett, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.